He's just a janitor. What could he possibly know about advanced mathematics? Professor Collins sneered as he erased the complex equation from the whiteboard. But what if the person you dismiss could be the very genius the world needs? When a prestigious math professor catches a janitor solving an impossible equation in an empty classroom late at night, he's determined to expose the man as a fraud. But what happens when this janitor with chronic back pain and a hidden past demonstrates mathematical brilliance that challenges everything the academic world believes about intelligence and opportunity? Sometimes the answer comes from unexpected places, Marcus wrote beneath his solution. But will anyone be willing to listen? Watch the full story to discover how one man's mathematical gift could transform lives, including his own. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The hallways of Westfield University's mathematics department fell silent as the clock struck 9 p.m. Professor Richard Collins, a man whose reputation preceded him in academic circles, gathered his leather-bound notebook and designer pen. His salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the distinguished look befitting his position as the department's most celebrated mind. Another day wasted on mediocre minds, Richard muttered to himself, organizing the papers on his mahogany desk. His latest graduate seminar had been particularly disappointing. None of his students had managed to solve the complex differential equation he presented, an equation he himself had been puzzling over for weeks. The equation remained unsolved on his classroom's whiteboard, a testament to what Richard saw as the declining quality of education. He'd leave it there overnight, a reminder to his students of their failure when they arrived tomorrow. As he switched off his office light and locked the door, Richard noticed the janitor's cart parked outside the main lecture hall. The squeaking of wheels echoed through the corridor as Marcus Johnson, a quiet man in his 30s with deep brown skin and gentle eyes, pushed his cleaning supplies toward the classrooms. "Evening, Professor," Marcus nodded respectfully. Richard barely acknowledged him with a dismissive wave, not bothering to make eye contact. In Richard's worldview, the university operated on a strict hierarchy, and maintenance staff occupied the lowest rung. Marcus waited until the professor's footsteps faded before entering the lecture hall. He preferred working when the building was empty, no judgmental stares, no one to make him feel less than human. His back throbbed with a familiar pain as he began cleaning, a permanent reminder of Ms. Patterson, his high school algebra teacher who'd struck him with a ruler when he'd corrected her calculation. The injury had never properly healed, making sitting for long periods unbearable. As Marcus wiped down the desks, his eyes drifted to the whiteboard covered in mathematical symbols. His hand paused mid-wipe, his attention captured by the elegant dance of numbers and variables. Marcus moved closer, studying the equation intently. He recognized it as a variation of a problem he'd encountered in the textbooks he secretly read in the university library during his lunch breaks. Without thinking, Marcus picked up a marker. His fingers trembled slightly, not from uncertainty about the mathematics, but from the risk he was taking. If someone saw him. But the building was empty. The equation called to him like a siren song. Marcus began to write, standing at an angle that minimized his back pain. Numbers and symbols flowed from the marker as naturally as breathing. He made adjustments, crossed out variables, substituted expressions, his mind completely absorbed in the elegant puzzle before him. 2 hours later, Marcus stepped back, surveying his work with quiet satisfaction. The solution was complete, elegant in its simplicity despite the complex route required to reach it. He replaced the cap on the marker and returned to his cleaning duties, unaware that he had solved a problem that had confounded some of the brightest mathematical minds at the university. As Marcus wheeled his cart out of the room, he didn't notice Professor Richard Collins standing in the shadowed doorway, his face a mask of disbelief as he stared at the solved equation on his whiteboard. "What do you think you're doing?" Richard's sharp voice cut through the silent classroom the following evening. Marcus froze, mop in hand, his heart pounding. "Just cleaning, sir." "Don't lie to me." Richard strode toward the whiteboard where fresh equations were written in Marcus's neat handwriting. "Did you write this?" Marcus hesitated. The truth could cost him his job, but lying went against his nature. Yes, sir. Richard's laugh was cold, disbelieving. You expect me to believe a janitor solved this? This is university property, not your personal doodling pad. Who put you up to this? Was it Dr. Okafor? Nobody, sir. I just. Marcus gestured weakly at the board. I saw the problem and knew the approach. Impossible. Richard's voice dripped with disdain. Where did you study higher-level mathematics? Janitor school. The mockery stung. Marcus straightened despite the pain shooting through his lower back. I taught myself, sir. From books in the library. Self-taught? Richard scoffed, adjusting his expensive glasses. This equation has stumped my doctoral candidates for weeks. Marcus remained silent, eyes lowered. Experience had taught him that defending himself often made situations worse. Richard circled him like a predator. Show me. Solve this. He aggressively wrote a new equation on the board, a deliberately complicated one. Marcus studied it, his mind immediately mapping pathways to the solution. But as he reached for the marker, memories flooded back, Ms. Patterson's classroom 15 years ago, her ruler cracking against his spine when he'd solved an equation faster than she could explain it. He's making a mockery of my teaching, she'd announced to the class. The beating had left him with chronic pain and ended his academic dreams. I should get back to work, Marcus said quietly. That's what I thought. Richard grabbed an eraser and violently wiped away Marcus's work from the previous night. Stick to cleaning, Mr. Johnson. That's what you're qualified for. After Richard left, Marcus leaned against the wall, fighting back emotions. His mind drifted to his childhood in South Chicago, where his single mother had recognized his gift early. She'd scraped together money for advanced math books while working double shifts. By 12, Marcus was solving calculus problems. By 16, he'd been offered a full scholarship to MIT. Then came Ms. Patterson's class. One incident, one prejudiced teacher, one violent outburst, and his future vanished. The injury required expensive treatments they couldn't afford. The scholarship disappeared when he couldn't finish high school. His mother fell ill from overwork, and Marcus took whatever jobs he could to support them. Now, at 34, he cleaned the classrooms where he should have been teaching. Marcus resumed mopping, keeping his back as straight as possible to minimize the pain. The equations still danced in his head, offering the only freedom his circumstances couldn't constrain. Tonight, he decided, he would stay away from the whiteboards. But as he pushed his cart down the hallway, he passed Dr. Amara Okafor's classroom. The young black woman was the newest addition to the mathematics department, often working late. Through the door's window, Marcus saw another complex equation on her board, different from Richard's, but equally challenging. He hesitated only briefly before moving on. Some risks weren't worth taking twice. Yet, the numbers called to him, like they always had. You solved it. Dr. Amara Okafor's deep brown eyes widened as she examined the equation on Richard's whiteboard the next morning. I thought you said this was beyond your graduate students. Richard Collins straightened his silk tie, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I had a breakthrough last night. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective. Amara traced the solution with her finger. Interesting approach. Not conventional at all. She turned to Richard with a curious expression. It's almost reminiscent of Ramanujan's methods, intuitive leaps rather than standard academic progression. Richard's smile faltered slightly. Mathematics allows for multiple approaches to the same solution, Dr. Okafor. Surely they taught you that at Howard University. The subtle dig at her alma mater didn't escape Amara's notice, but she maintained her professional composure. As one of the few black female professors in the department, she developed a thick skin for Richard's thinly veiled condescension. Of course, Professor Collins. I'm merely observing that this solution shows unexpected creativity. She gathered her materials. I look forward to your presentation at next week's departmental meeting. After she left, Richard stared at the whiteboard, troubled. He hadn't actually solved the equation, he'd simply taken credit for the janitor's work, assuming no one would ever know. But Amara's scrutiny made him uneasy. He quickly erased the board, determined to work through the solution himself to understand the methodology before the presentation. Later that afternoon, Richard's graduate seminar was in full, frustrated swing. 6 students, all from prestigious undergraduate programs, huddled around a table struggling with a new problem Richard had assigned, a theoretical approach to optimizing quantum computing algorithms through advanced calculus. "This is impossible," whispered Blake Thompson, Richard's star student and son of a university donor. "He's setting us up to fail." "Maybe that's the point," replied Sophia Chen, adjusting her glasses. "To show us we're not as smart as we think." Outside the classroom, Marcus pushed his cart quietly, catching fragments of their conversation. He paused momentarily, the equations they discussed igniting his curiosity. Through the door's window, he glimpsed the whiteboard filled with mathematical symbols that made perfect sense to him. That night, after everyone had gone, Marcus stood before that same whiteboard. He shouldn't do this. Not after Professor Collins had threatened him. But the problem was beautiful, a mathematical puzzle that deserved to be solved. His back aching, Marcus worked standing at an angle, careful not to put pressure on his injured spine. For 2 hours, he lost himself in numbers and variables, in the pure joy of mathematics that had been his only consistent companion through years of hardship. When he finished, he stepped back to admire the elegant solution. This time, however, he didn't leave it signed. Instead, he wrote a small note at the bottom: "Sometimes the answer comes from unexpected places." Marcus didn't know that his mathematical approach contained an innovative technique that had eluded researchers in the field. He only knew that the solution felt right, harmonious in its logical progression. The next morning, Richard arrived early to find his classroom already occupied by excited graduate students clustered around the whiteboard. "Professor," Blake called out. "Did you solve it for us? This is brilliant." Richard approached slowly, his face betraying his confusion as he examined the solution he'd never seen before. It was correct, more than correct. It was elegant, innovative, and had implications beyond the original problem. "Who did this?" Richard demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. The students looked at each other, confused. "We thought you did, sir," Sophia said. Richard's eyes narrowed as he read the small note at the bottom of the board. His mind immediately flashed to Marcus Johnson. It couldn't be. It was impossible. "Everyone out," he ordered abruptly. "Class is cancelled today." As the students filed out, murmuring in confusion, Richard stood alone staring at the solution. First his equation, now this. Either someone was playing an elaborate prank, or... Richard refused to complete the thought. He pulled out his phone and called campus security. "I need surveillance footage from the mathematics building, overnight hours. Someone's been accessing the classrooms." What Richard didn't know was that Amara Okafor had seen Marcus working late the previous nights. She'd watched from the shadows, quietly observing as the janitor solved complex mathematical problems with an ease that rivaled, perhaps even surpassed, the department's professors. And she had recognized in Marcus something Richard never would, genuine brilliance that transcended credentials and circumstance. Richard Collins paced his office, the surveillance request form clutched in his hand. Campus security had been reluctant, requiring departmental authorization for overnight camera installation. The bureaucratic hurdles infuriated him, but he pulled strings with Dean Elizabeth Harrington, emphasizing potential security concerns without mentioning his true suspicions. "Someone is accessing sensitive research materials," he told her, carefully omitting that the someone was the university janitor. Richard's real fear wasn't about security, it was about reputation. His position at Westfield was built on being the brightest mathematical mind in the department. The possibility that someone without credentials could outshine him threatened everything he'd built. He called his most trusted graduate assistant. "Blake, I need your help with a delicate matter." Blake Thompson arrived within 15 minutes, his polo shirt bearing his family's country club insignia. The young man's academic career benefited greatly from his father's generous donations to the university's endowment, a fact Richard leveraged regularly. "I need you to observe the janitor, Marcus Johnson." Discreetly. Blake's expression revealed his confusion. "The janitor, sir. I have reason to believe he's interfering with departmental resources. Just watch his movements and report back." As Blake left, Richard turned to his computer, searching faculty databases for information on Marcus Johnson. Nothing appeared in academic records, no degrees, no publications, nothing to suggest mathematical ability. Just as he expected. Meanwhile, Marcus wheeled his cart through the mathematics building, unaware of the scrutiny he'd soon face. His thoughts were occupied with a new equation he'd glimpsed in Dr. Okafor's classroom, a fascinating problem involving non-Euclidean geometry. "Marcus," a voice called, interrupting his thoughts. Dr. Amara Okafor approached, her bright yellow headwrap a splash of color against the building's muted tones. "Professor Okafor," Marcus nodded respectfully, immediately straightening his posture despite the pain. "That classroom looking clean enough?" she asked with a knowing smile. Marcus felt heat rising to his face. Had she seen him at the whiteboard? "I try my best, ma'am." "I'm sure you do," she replied. "In everything." She held his gaze meaningfully before continuing down the hallway. That evening, Dean Elizabeth Harrington approved Richard's request for temporary surveillance. The cameras would be installed discreetly, focused on the whiteboards in Richard's classroom. "This is highly unusual, Richard," Elizabeth said, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun that matched her rigid administrative style. "I expect a full explanation once your concerns are addressed." "Of course, Elizabeth. This is about maintaining the integrity of our department." What Richard didn't reveal was that he'd already left a complex, unsolved equation on his board, bait for his mathematical trap. At home that night, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table in the modest apartment he shared with his mother. Elaine Johnson, now in her 60s and slowed by years of hard labor, watched her son with knowing eyes as he sketched equations on scratch paper. "You've got that look again," she observed, placing a cup of tea beside him. "The one you had as a child when numbers danced in your head." Marcus smiled weakly. "Just passing time, Mama." "Marcus Johnson, don't you lie to your mother. Something's happening at that university." He sighed, putting down his pencil. "There's an equation, actually, several. Challenging ones." "And you solved them," she stated rather than asked. "I shouldn't have. The professor, he caught me once already. Thinks I'm mocking him somehow." Elaine's expression hardened. People like him never believe talent can exist without their permission. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your gift doesn't need credentials to be real, son." Marcus covered her hand with his own. "But it needs credentials to be respected." The next morning, Blake Thompson positioned himself near the mathematics building entrance, casually scrolling through his phone as he waited for Marcus to arrive. When the janitor appeared, pushing his cart toward the service entrance, Blake followed at a distance. Throughout the day, he observed Marcus performing mundane cleaning duties, nothing suspicious. But Blake noticed something curious: how Marcus's eyes lingered on equations in classrooms, how he sometimes mouthed solutions to himself while mopping. For someone supposedly uneducated, he seemed unusually interested in advanced mathematics. By evening, the surveillance cameras were in place, hidden among ceiling fixtures, their lenses focused on Richard's whiteboard with its deliberately complex equation, a problem Richard himself had struggled with for months. The trap was set. The clock in the empty mathematics building read 11:42 p.m. when Marcus Johnson entered Professor Collins' classroom. His cleaning cart squeaked against the silence as he pushed it through the doorway, unaware of the camera recording his every move. Marcus began his usual routine, emptying trash bins, wiping surfaces, sweeping the floor. But his eyes kept drifting to the whiteboard, where Richard's equation beckoned. It was more complex than previous problems, dealing with theoretical applications in quantum computing. Marcus recognized it as a variation of the Riemann hypothesis, notoriously difficult, yet tantalizingly beautiful. He tried to ignore it, focusing on his cleaning duties. But mathematics had always been Marcus's refuge, the one place where his mind could truly soar beyond his circumstances. Setting aside his mop, Marcus approached the board. He studied the equation for several minutes, his lips moving silently as he processed the variables and constraints. Then, almost reverently, he picked up a marker and began to write. The camera captured everything, his confident strokes, the systematic approach, the moments of contemplation followed by bursts of insight. For nearly an hour, Marcus worked through the problem, occasionally wincing as his back pain flared, forcing him to adjust his stance. When he finished, he stepped back to review his work. The solution was elegant, innovative in its approach. Marcus permitted himself a small smile before returning to his cleaning duties, unaware that his mathematical brilliance had been preserved as evidence. The next morning, Richard Collins sat in his office, reviewing the footage with growing disbelief and anger. The janitor had solved an equation that had stumped him for months. It was impossible. Inconceivable. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Richard stormed through the building, searching for Marcus. He found him mopping the corridor outside the mathematics department office. "My office." "Now," Richard demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. Once inside with the door closed, Richard placed his laptop on the desk, turning the screen to show Marcus the surveillance footage. "Explain this," he commanded. Marcus stared at the image of himself solving the equation, his stomach sinking. "I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't mean any harm." "Harm? You're making a mockery of this institution. Who's helping you? Is it some kind of prank? Did one of my colleagues put you up to this to humiliate me?" "No one's helping me, sir. I just understand mathematics." Richard laughed coldly. A janitor with no formal education just happens to solve theoretical mathematics that challenge the field's leading minds. "Who are you really?" Marcus straightened, fighting through his back pain. "I'm exactly who my employee file says I am. I clean your buildings. But I've always understood numbers." "Impossible." Richard leaned forward. "Where did you study? Who trained you?" "I was self-taught, mostly. My mother bought me books when she could afford them. I had a scholarship to MIT once, but..." Marcus's voice trailed off. "But what? You expect me to believe MIT accepted you?" "It doesn't matter now." Richard's eyes narrowed. "If you're so brilliant, why are you pushing a mop instead of teaching?" Marcus hesitated, the old pain surfacing, both physical and emotional. "My high school algebra teacher, Ms. Patterson. She didn't like that I corrected her calculations in class. Said I was being disrespectful, showing off. She made an example of me." "What does that mean?" "She beat me with a ruler, across my back. Hard enough to cause permanent damage." Marcus's voice was steady despite the painful memory. "I couldn't sit through classes anymore. The medical bills took everything we had. The scholarship disappeared when I couldn't finish high school." Richard scoffed. "A convenient story. Blame your failures on someone else." "It's not a story, Professor. It's my life." Richard stood up, closing his laptop. "I don't know what game you're playing, Mr. Johnson, but it ends now. Stay away from my classrooms, stay away from my whiteboards. Stick to what you're qualified for. And if I don't? Then you'll be looking for another job. I'm sure the university doesn't employ janitors to solve equations instead of cleaning floors." After Marcus left, Richard sat alone, troubled by the undeniable mathematical talent he'd witnessed. If the janitor truly possessed this ability, it challenged Richard's fundamental beliefs about intelligence, education, and worthiness. It was easier to believe it was all an elaborate hoax. The mathematics department's weekly faculty meeting buzzed with the usual academic discussions until Richard Collins cleared his throat purposefully. Amara Okafor recognized the smug expression that typically preceded one of Richard's self-aggrandizing announcements. "I've decided to organize a special mathematical challenge," Richard announced, straightening his Italian silk tie. Part of our commitment to identifying exceptional talent. Dean Elizabeth Harrington, who rarely attended departmental meetings, raised an eyebrow. This isn't on our academic calendar, Professor Collins. A spontaneous opportunity, Richard replied smoothly. I've identified a potential candidate with unconventional qualifications. I believe a public demonstration would benefit our department's reputation for innovation. Amara leaned forward. Who is this candidate? Richard smiled thinly. Marcus Johnson. Murmurs rippled through the room. Most faculty members knew Marcus only as the quiet janitor who cleaned their classrooms. The maintenance worker? Dean Harrington asked incredulously. Precisely. I've observed him attempting to solve complex equations. I propose a public challenge, our top graduate student, Blake Thompson, versus Mr. Johnson. If Johnson succeeds, perhaps we might consider some form of scholarship program. The condescension in Richard's voice made clear he expected no such outcome. Amara's eyes narrowed. And if he fails? Then he returns to his appropriate duties without further mathematical aspirations. After the meeting, Amara cornered Richard in the hallway. What are you really doing, Collins? Exposing a fraud, Richard replied coldly. Or would you prefer we allow unqualified individuals to make mockeries of our academic standards? Interesting choice of words, unqualified. What qualifications matter most, Richard? Formal education or genuine ability? Richard's expression hardened. This isn't about philosophy, Okafor. It's about protecting institutional integrity. Later that evening, Richard confronted Marcus as he cleaned the mathematics building lobby. I've arranged a challenge, Johnson. You versus my best graduate student. 3 complex mathematical problems, solved in real time before an audience of faculty and students. Marcus set down his mop. Why would I agree to that? Because your continued employment depends on it. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've spoken with your supervisor. Apparently, there have been concerns about your work performance. Time spent on unauthorized activities during paid hours. You're threatening my job. I'm offering an opportunity. Succeed, and the university might consider a scholarship program. Fail, and we all return to our appropriate roles. Marcus fell silent, weighing his options. The prospect of public exposure terrified him, the judgmental stares, the whispers, the potential humiliation. His back throbbed at the memory of past public shame. What if I refuse? Your supervisor has already documented the performance issues I mentioned. Draw your own conclusions. After Richard left, Marcus sank onto a bench, his back screaming in protest at even this slight pressure. The ultimatum left him little choice. His mother's medication was expensive, they couldn't afford for him to lose this job. As he contemplated his situation, Dr. Okafor approached, having observed the interaction from a distance. He's setting you up, she said without preamble, sitting beside him. Marcus nodded. I know. Yet you'll do it anyway. I need this job, Dr. Okafor. Amara studied him thoughtfully. I watched you solve that non-Euclidean geometry problem in my classroom last week. Your approach was brilliant. Unconventional, but brilliant. Marcus looked up, surprised. You thought no one saw, she continued. I stayed late grading papers and noticed you working at my board. I didn't interrupt because I was fascinated by your methodology. I shouldn't have. Marcus, she interrupted gently, mathematics doesn't care about credentials. It responds to understanding, to insight. You have both. She handed him a business card. My office hours are listed here. If you want to prepare for this challenge, I'm available. Why would you help me? Amara's expression softened. Because talent deserves nurturing, regardless of where it's found. She stood to leave. And because the look on Richard Collins' face when you solve his impossible problems will be priceless. For the first time in days, Marcus smiled. That night, he called his mother to explain the situation. Elaine Johnson listened quietly before responding with the determination that had sustained their family through decades of hardship. "You were solving college-level calculus at 12 years old, Marcus. You've been carrying these equations in your head while pushing a mop for years. It's time the world saw what I've always known. It's not that simple, Mama. These people, they don't want me to succeed." "Since when has that stopped?" Johnson. Elaine's voice carried the strength of generations who had triumphed against impossible odds. "Your gift doesn't belong to Professor Collins or Westfield University. It belongs to you. Always has." As Marcus hung up, Blake Thompson was meeting with Richard in his office, receiving special preparation for the upcoming challenge. "These will be the problems," Richard explained, showing Blake 3 equations. "Study them thoroughly. Develop your approaches in advance." Blake frowned. "Isn't that cheating?" "It's ensuring the appropriate outcome," Richard corrected smoothly. "The janitor needs to understand his place in the academic hierarchy. This demonstration will accomplish that." What Richard didn't know was that Dr. Amara Okafor had anticipated this exact scenario. As the department's newest faculty member, she had been assigned to the challenge committee responsible for selecting the problems, and she had no intention of using Richard's predetermined equations. The stage was set for a mathematical showdown that would shake Westfield University's rigid academic hierarchy to its foundations. The Westfield University auditorium hummed with anticipation as faculty members, students, and even local media filed in for what had been billed as an extraordinary mathematical challenge. At the front of the room, 2 whiteboards stood side by side beneath bright lights, creating an impromptu stage. Marcus Johnson waited in a small preparation room, his hands trembling slightly as he straightened his borrowed blazer. Dr. Okafor had insisted he dress the part of an academic for the challenge, lending him her brother's jacket which hung somewhat loosely on his frame. "Remember," Amara said, adjusting his collar, "solve the problems your way. Don't try to follow conventional methodology if you see a more intuitive path." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. The room seemed to spin around him as anxiety tightened his chest. "There are so many people." "Focus on the mathematics," she advised. "Nothing else exists when you're solving a problem, remember that feeling." In another preparation room, Richard coached Blake Thompson through last-minute strategy. "Work quickly but maintain precision," Richard instructed. "The problems we practiced are complex but follow standard approaches. The janitor will be completely out of his depth." Blake straightened his designer sweater, confidence radiating from his privileged bearing. "I won't let you down, Professor." When Marcus entered the auditorium, whispers rippled through the crowd. Many recognized him only as the man who cleaned their classrooms and offices. Several graduate students exchanged smirks, while faculty members regarded him with curiosity or dismissal. Dean Elizabeth Harrington approached the podium, her severe gray suit matching her businesslike demeanor. "Welcome to this unusual academic exercise. Professor Collins has arranged this challenge to explore unconventional talent identification methods." She paused, looking directly at Marcus with poorly concealed skepticism. "Today's participants will attempt to solve 3 advanced mathematical problems, selected by our faculty committee." Richard Collins sat in the front row, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. The humiliation of the janitor would reinforce the natural order he believed in so deeply. What he didn't know was that Dr. Okafor had convinced the committee to select entirely different problems than those Richard had provided to Blake, problems that required mathematical intuition rather than rehearsed techniques. Marcus and Blake took their positions at the whiteboards as Dr. Okafor unveiled the first problem, a complex topological question involving manifolds. Blake's confident expression faltered slightly as he realized this wasn't one of the problems he practiced. For Marcus, the initial panic of public performance faded as soon as the equation appeared. The mathematics called to him, creating a tunnel vision where only numbers and relationships existed. His back pain receded to a distant throb as he picked up a marker and began working. The audience watched in growing amazement as Marcus's hand moved across the whiteboard with surprising confidence. While Blake worked methodically through standard approaches, Marcus's solution took unexpected turns, intuitive leaps that bypassed conventional steps. Marcus finished the first problem 3 minutes before Blake, his solution elegant in its unconventional approach. The audience's whispers grew louder. The second problem involved a quantum computing algorithm optimization. Blake struggled visibly, while Marcus worked through it with the practiced ease of someone who had contemplated similar questions during countless hours pushing a mop through silent hallways. By the third problem, an unsolved question in number theory that the committee had included as a virtually impossible challenge, the audience's attitude had transformed. Faculty members leaned forward in their seats. Graduate students watched with astonishment. Even Dean Harrington's skepticism had given way to undisguised interest. Blake stared at the final problem, his marker hovering uncertainly over the whiteboard. But Marcus dove in with confidence, his approach revolutionary in its simplicity. When he set down his marker 15 minutes later, he had developed a partial solution framework that suggested a pathway to fully resolving the supposedly unsolvable problem. The auditorium fell silent. Dr. Okafor broke the silence, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned room. I believe we have witnessed something extraordinary today. Richard Collins sat rigid in his seat, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. His planned humiliation had transformed into something entirely different. As the faculty committee huddled to evaluate the solutions, Marcus stood awkwardly beside his whiteboard, suddenly aware again of the many eyes upon him. His back throbbed as tension returned to his body. Blake approached him, extending his hand with surprising graciousness. That was incredible. How did you see the manifold connection so quickly? Before Marcus could answer, the committee returned. Dr. Okafor announced their unanimous decision: Marcus Johnson had demonstrated mathematical ability of the highest order. Dean Harrington stepped forward, her administrative mind already calculating the publicity value of the situation. Mr. Johnson, Westfield University would like to discuss your future with us in a different capacity. As applause erupted around him, Marcus caught Richard Collins' eye. The professor's expression had transformed from smugness to something more complex, anger mixed with dawning recognition that he had gravely misjudged the man who cleaned his classroom. The morning after the challenge, Westfield University buzzed with conversation about the janitor who had outperformed a top graduate student. Marcus arrived for his cleaning shift to find students pointing and whispering as he passed. Some approached with questions about his background, while others asked him to examine their mathematical homework, a tension that made him deeply uncomfortable. Richard Collins had not taken his public embarrassment gracefully. By mid-morning, he had scheduled an emergency meeting with Dean Harrington in her mahogany-paneled office overlooking the campus quad. This entire situation is absurd, Richard fumed, pacing before her desk. The problems were clearly compromised. Johnson must have had advanced knowledge. Elizabeth Harrington regarded him coolly. The problems were secured by the faculty committee until the moment of presentation, Richard. Dr. Okafor personally oversaw the process. Okafor, Richard spat the name. She's been undermining me from the start. She probably coached him. These are serious accusations against a tenured colleague, Elizabeth noted, her tone measured. Do you have evidence? MNJ, Richard's silence answered her question. What troubles me more, she continued, is your apparent desire to see this young man fail rather than celebrating the discovery of remarkable talent. Isn't that what universities exist to nurture? Talent requires proper cultivation through rigorous academic channels, Richard insisted. You can't simply pluck a janitor from the hallway and declare him a mathematician. Elizabeth's expression hardened. Perhaps it's time we examine Mr. Johnson's background more thoroughly. If there's fraud here, we'll find it. If not. She left the implication hanging. Meanwhile, Amara Okafor found Marcus in an empty classroom, mopping the floor despite his newfound campus fame. You're still cleaning? She asked, surprised. Marcus continued his methodical movements. It's still my job. After yesterday, I suspect you'll have options. He paused, leaning slightly on the mop to relieve his back pain. People like me don't suddenly get options, Dr. Okafor. People like you, she challenged gently. Uneducated. Unqualified. The mathematics you demonstrated yesterday requires no further qualification. She sat on a desk, studying him. Why did you never try to return to education after what happened in high school? Marcus's rhythm with the mop faltered. My mother got sick. Medical bills piled up. By the time she was stable, it seemed too late. And my back. He straightened with visible discomfort. Extended sitting is nearly impossible. Yet you've continued studying. Mathematics doesn't need a classroom. A small smile touched his lips. It's everywhere, in everything. I read what I can find. I solve problems in my head while I work. That's remarkable dedication, Marcus. He shrugged. It's not dedication when it's simply who you are. Across campus, Dean Harrington initiated a discreet investigation into Marcus Johnson's background. She assigned her assistant to compile his employment records and any available educational history. By afternoon, preliminary information reached her desk. Marcus's employment record showed 8 years of exemplary service at Westfield. Before that, he had worked maintenance at a community college and a public library, always surrounded by books and learning, she noted with interest. His educational records were sparse but revealing. Exceptional grades until 10th grade, followed by incomplete coursework and eventual withdrawal. A notation about medical absence appeared repeatedly in his final semester. Most significant was a letter from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology dated 15 years earlier, official confirmation of a full scholarship offer contingent upon high school graduation. A scholarship never claimed. Elizabeth felt a growing discomfort. If Marcus Johnson was indeed a mathematical prodigy whose education had been derailed by circumstances, and the university had employed him for 8 years without recognizing his abilities, it reflected poorly on the institution's commitment to identifying and nurturing talent regardless of background. While Dean Harrington pieced together Marcus's history, Richard Collins was developing his counter-strategy. If he couldn't disprove Johnson's abilities, he would raise questions about the appropriateness of prioritizing a maintenance worker with no credentials over qualified students who had followed proper academic paths. He drafted a letter to the university board expressing concerns about lowering institutional standards and the dangerous precedent of elevating untrained talent over disciplined scholarship. That evening, Richard circulated his letter among selected faculty, seeking signatures. Many declined, particularly after witnessing Marcus's performance at the challenge. But several older professors, uncomfortable with the disruption to academic hierarchy, added their names. As Richard collected his final signature, he received an unexpected visitor to his office, Blake Thompson. "I can't support your petition, Professor," Blake said firmly. Richard stared at his protégé with surprise. "I would have expected your loyalty, considering your performance yesterday." "I lost fairly to a superior mathematical mind," Blake replied. "Isn't that what science is supposed to value? Truth over prestige?" "You don't understand the implications," Richard insisted. "This sets a precedent that devalues your entire educational journey." Blake considered this. "Actually, I think it reminds us why we pursue that journey in the first place, for knowledge itself, not just credentials." As Blake left, Richard sat alone, confronting an uncomfortable truth. His opposition to Marcus Johnson had never really been about academic standards or institutional integrity. It was about protecting his own status in a system that had always favored people exactly like him. Dean Elizabeth Harrington's investigation into Marcus Johnson's background reached a critical phase when she contacted his former high school. The administrator she spoke with initially provided only basic confirmation of Marcus's attendance and withdrawal. But when Elizabeth mentioned his mathematical abilities, the woman's tone changed. "Oh, the Johnson boy. That was, unfortunate. One of our saddest cases. Could you elaborate?" Elizabeth pressed. A pause, then, there was an incident with a teacher, Ms. Patterson. It was before my time, but it's something of a cautionary tale here now. A gifted student, physical punishment, severe consequences. Perhaps you should speak with our current principal, Dr. Watkins. He was a counselor here then. An hour later, Elizabeth was reviewing a confidential incident report emailed by Dr. Watkins, 15 years old but meticulously preserved. The document detailed a classroom confrontation where Marcus, then 16, had identified an error in Ms. Patterson's algebraic demonstration. The teacher had accused him of disrespect and ordered him to the front of the class where she had struck him repeatedly across the lower back with a wooden ruler. The injury had required hospitalization and resulted in permanent spinal damage. Ms. Patterson had been dismissed, but the damage was done. Marcus had attempted to continue his education but couldn't physically remain seated through classes. His attendance became sporadic, then ceased entirely. Elizabeth set down the report, removing her reading glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. The final piece of the puzzle was a letter from MIT's admissions office, rescinding Marcus's scholarship due to failure to complete secondary education requirements. The story was heartbreakingly clear: a mathematical prodigy derailed by a single act of cruelty, forced into a life far below his intellectual capabilities. Elizabeth picked up her phone. "Please ask Dr. Okafor to come to my office immediately." When Amara arrived, Elizabeth shared her findings. "I believe Westfield has an opportunity to right a historic wrong," she concluded. "And perhaps gain an extraordinary talent in the process." Amara nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus mentioned standing is more comfortable than sitting for his back. We could accommodate that in a teaching or research position." "If he's interested," Elizabeth cautioned. "After his treatment by certain faculty members, I wouldn't blame him for wanting nothing to do with academia." "I suspect his love of mathematics might overcome that reluctance," Amara replied. "But there's another obstacle: Richard Collins is gathering opposition. He sees Marcus as a threat to traditional academic pathways." "Let him try," Elizabeth's voice hardened. "I've been looking for an opportunity to address some of Collins' more problematic attitudes for years." Meanwhile, Marcus arrived home to find his mother entertaining an unexpected visitor, Dr. James Watkins, his former high school counselor, now principal. "Marcus," Dr. Watkins stood, extending his hand. "It's been too long." "Dr. Watkins," Marcus replied, confusion evident as he shook the offered hand. "What brings you here?" "Westfield University's dean contacted me today, asking about your history." The older man's expression was both sad and hopeful. "It seems you've finally been discovered, despite everything." Elaine Johnson watched her son carefully. "Dr. Watkins brought something for you." The principal removed a folder from his briefcase. "Your MIT acceptance and scholarship offer. I kept a copy all these years, hoping someday it might matter again." Marcus took the folder with trembling hands. "Why?" "Because what happened to you was one of the greatest professional failures I've ever witnessed," Dr. Watkins admitted. "A brilliant mind like yours, shut out of academia because of one teacher's cruelty and a system that couldn't accommodate the consequences." "That was a long time ago," Marcus said quietly. "And yet here you are, still solving complex mathematics despite everything." Dr. Watkins smiled. "The university dean asked about you because you outperformed their graduate students. She's investigating your background not to discredit you, Marcus, but to understand you." After Dr. Watkins left, Elaine found Marcus sitting at their small kitchen table, the MIT letter open before him. "All these years," she said softly, "you've been cleaning classrooms you should have been teaching in." "It wasn't for nothing, Mama. I still had the mathematics. No one could take that away." The next morning, Richard Collins arrived at the mathematics department to find a notice for an emergency faculty meeting called by Dean Harrington. The agenda included one item: discussion of educational opportunity programs for non-traditional students. Richard immediately recognized the threat to his campaign against Marcus Johnson. He spent the morning calling faculty allies, solidifying their opposition to any special accommodation for the janitor. When the meeting convened that afternoon, Elizabeth Harrington opened with a statement that silenced the room. 15 years ago, Westfield University missed an opportunity to educate one of the most naturally gifted mathematical minds of his generation. Through a series of tragic circumstances and systemic failures, that mind has spent the last 8 years cleaning our classrooms rather than learning or teaching in them. She outlined Marcus's history, including the MIT scholarship and the incident that derailed his education. As she spoke, faculty members exchanged troubled glances. Even some of Richard's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Today, Elizabeth continued, we have a chance to correct this institutional failure. I am proposing a special admission and accommodation program for Mr. Johnson, with appropriate adaptations for his physical limitations. Richard rose immediately. While this story is certainly moving, it doesn't change the fundamental issue of academic standards. We cannot simply, Professor Collins, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice steely, would you be willing to take a mathematical examination alongside Mr. Johnson, independently evaluated by external faculty from MIT? Since your concern is standards, I assume you'd welcome the opportunity to demonstrate the superiority of traditional academic training. The room fell silent. Richard's face flushed as he recognized the trap, a public challenge he couldn't possibly win against Marcus's natural brilliance, but couldn't refuse without undermining his own argument. Before Richard could respond, the department office assistant entered hurriedly, handing Elizabeth a note. After reading it, the dean looked up with a grim expression. It seems this discussion has been complicated by new developments. Mr. Johnson submitted his resignation this morning, effective immediately. Amara Okafor stood quickly. Did he say why? Elizabeth's reply was quiet but carried clearly through the stunned room. His note says only that he doesn't wish to be the cause of division within the university that has employed him fairly for 8 years. Despite achieving mathematical vindication, Marcus Johnson had once again been driven from an educational institution, not by force this time, but by the painful recognition that some prejudices ran too deep to overcome. 3 days after Marcus Johnson's resignation, Dr. Amara Okafor found him in the small public library where he'd spent countless lunch breaks over the years, browsing advanced mathematics texts in the reference section. The university misses its janitor, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Marcus looked up from a book on algebraic topology. I doubt that's true of everyone. No, she agreed frankly. Some people are threatened by talent they can't control or categorize. But others recognize brilliance regardless of its packaging. She placed a formal envelope on the table between them. Dean Harrington asked me to deliver this. After you left, she reached out to the Mathematical Association of America. They've arranged a special evaluation session at Westfield next week, with external reviewers from MIT, Princeton, and Stanford. Marcus made no move to take the envelope. Why would I subject myself to more scrutiny? Because this time, Richard Collins will be evaluated alongside you. A small smile played at Amara's lips. He couldn't refuse without undermining his entire argument about academic standards versus natural ability. So I'd be a pawn in university politics? No, Marcus. You'd be reclaiming the future that was stolen from you. Amara leaned forward. The evaluation isn't just for show. The MAA is prepared to offer special certification based on demonstrated ability rather than formal education. It could open doors that have been closed to you for 15 years. Marcus's expression revealed his inner conflict. What about my mother? Her medication is expensive. I need steady work. Dean Harrington anticipated that concern. Amara tapped the envelope. There's a formal offer inside, paid participation in the evaluation process with a retention bonus regardless of outcome. And she hesitated, I've arranged accommodations for your back issues. You'll be able to work standing when necessary. For several long moments, Marcus stared at the envelope, weighing a lifetime of disappointment against this unexpected opportunity. Tell Dean Harrington I'll consider it, he finally said. The day of the evaluation arrived with unexpected media attention. The story of a janitor mathematician challenging academic conventions had spread beyond campus, attracting interest from educational publications and local news outlets. Inside Westfield's largest lecture hall, an impressive panel had assembled, 3 distinguished mathematicians from elite institutions, positioned before a large audience of faculty, students, and curious community members. Richard Collins arrived immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, projecting confidence despite his private concerns. His strategy was to emphasize formal mathematical notation and academic convention, areas where Marcus's self-taught methods might appear unpolished. When Marcus entered, a murmur rippled through the crowd. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, new clothes purchased with his participation fee. His mother, Elaine Johnson, sat in the front row beside Dr. Okafor, her proud expression tempered with protective concern. The lead evaluator, Dr. Tara Williams from MIT, explained the format. Today's session will involve 3 increasingly complex mathematical challenges, focusing on theoretical application rather than rote knowledge. Participants will work independently but simultaneously. A special workstation had been prepared for Marcus, a raised platform with a whiteboard positioned to allow him to work standing up, minimizing his back pain. As the first problem appeared on the main screen, a complex question involving quantum algorithm optimization, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of mathematical focus enveloping him. The audience, the judges, even Richard Collins faded from his awareness as numbers and symbols occupied his consciousness. Richard worked methodically, applying conventional approaches with precise notation. His expertise was undeniable, his technique refined by years of formal training. But Marcus moved through the problem with intuitive leaps that bypassed traditional steps. Where Richard built careful scaffolding of proven theorems and established principles, Marcus seemed to perceive the mathematical architecture directly, finding elegant bridges between concepts. By the third challenge, an unsolved problem at the forefront of current research, the difference in their approaches became striking. Richard applied existing methodologies with professional skill, reaching a partial solution that aligned with current academic thinking. Marcus, however, approached the problem from an entirely unexpected angle, developing a framework that suggested an innovative pathway toward complete resolution. His notation might have lacked conventional polish, but the mathematical insight was profound. When they finally presented their work to the evaluators, the contrast was clear. Richard had demonstrated mastery of established mathematical knowledge. Marcus had shown the ability to extend that knowledge in new directions. During the judges' deliberation, Marcus sat carefully on a specially padded chair, exhaustion etched on his face. His back throbbed from the extended concentration, but a different sensation was emerging alongside the pain, a sense of validation he'd never expected to experience. Richard approached, his expression unreadable. "Your approach to the third problem," he said stiffly. "It was unconventional." "I never learned the conventional approaches," Marcus replied. "Perhaps that's an advantage in some ways." The admission seemed difficult for Richard. Freedom from established patterns. Before Marcus could respond, the evaluators returned. Dr. Williams addressed the audience with measured enthusiasm. "What we've witnessed today represents 2 different but equally valuable mathematical minds. Professor Collins demonstrates exceptional mastery of established methodologies and formal techniques, exactly what we expect from top-tier traditional education." She turned toward Marcus. "Mr. Johnson shows extraordinary intuitive insight and innovative thinking that pushes beyond conventional approaches. His ability to conceptualize novel solutions suggests the kind of creativity that advances mathematical frontiers." Dr. Williams held up an official document. "The Mathematical Association of America is pleased to offer Mr. Johnson a special certification of mathematical excellence, acknowledging demonstrated ability equivalent to doctoral-level understanding." The audience erupted in applause as Marcus stared in disbelief at the recognition he'd never imagined possible. His mother wiped tears from her eyes as Dean Harrington nodded with satisfaction. Additionally, Dr. Williams continued when the applause subsided, "MIT Mathematics Department would like to discuss potential research opportunities with Mr. Johnson, with accommodations for his physical requirements." As the implications of this announcement rippled through the room, Richard Collins sat perfectly still, his worldview shifting uncomfortably beneath him. The system he had defended so vigorously, the rigid academic pathway he considered sacred, had just been bypassed by raw talent and intuitive brilliance. And somewhere deep within his carefully constructed academic identity, a reluctant question formed: how many other Marcus Johnsons had the system failed to recognize? The story of Marcus Johnson, now dubbed the janitor mathematician by campus publications, spread rapidly. The university's public relations department, recognizing a powerful narrative about accessibility and hidden talent, arranged interviews with educational journals and local media. For Marcus, the sudden transition from invisibility to celebrity was disorienting. After years of being overlooked, he now found himself the center of constant attention. Students stopped him in hallways seeking mathematical guidance. Faculty members who had previously ignored his existence now acknowledged him with respectful nods. Dean Elizabeth Harrington wasted no time capitalizing on the situation. 1 week after the evaluation, she called Marcus to her office to present a formal offer. Westfield University would like to establish a special position for you, she explained, sliding a document across her desk. Research Fellow in Mathematical Innovation, with teaching opportunities if you're interested. Marcus scanned the offer, focusing on the substantial salary figure, more than 5 times his janitor's wages. This is generous. It's commensurate with your abilities, Elizabeth corrected. And long overdue. The position includes health benefits covering dependents and accommodations for your physical needs. Standing desks. Flexible hours. And more. Elizabeth leaned forward. We'd like to establish a scholarship in your name for students from non-traditional backgrounds with exceptional mathematical aptitude. Your story, Marcus, could open doors for others like you. Though the offer was compelling, Marcus hesitated. What about Professor Collins? He's made his opposition clear. Elizabeth's expression hardened slightly. Professor Collins doesn't make university policy. Nevertheless, I've assigned Dr. Okafor as your departmental liaison to ensure a smooth transition. Later that day, Amara found Marcus in the mathematics building, standing before the department's wall of achievement, photographs and citations recognizing faculty accomplishments. Imagining your photo up there, she asked. Wondering if it belongs, he replied honestly. Amara studied him thoughtfully. You know what's remarkable about mathematics, Marcus? It doesn't care about credentials or conventions. An equation is either solved correctly or it isn't. The universe doesn't check your diploma before deciding if your solution works. The mathematical community does. Parts of it, she acknowledged. But that's changing. Your case is helping to change it. As Marcus weighed his decision, Richard Collins was marshalling final resistance. Though the external evaluation had undermined his academic arguments, he still commanded respect among traditional faculty members who viewed Marcus's potential appointment as a dangerous precedent. Richard drafted a formal petition to the university board, arguing that creating special positions outside normal hiring protocols threatened academic integrity. 8 senior professors signed, though notably fewer than Richard had anticipated. When the petition reached Elizabeth's desk, she shared it with Marcus, not to discourage him, but to ensure full transparency. This is the opposition you'll face if you accept our offer. I'd be dishonest if I pretended otherwise. Marcus read the document carefully, recognizing the familiar academic language that had excluded people like him for generations. They're afraid I'll lower standards. They're afraid you'll prove standards can be met through different paths, Elizabeth corrected. That's much more threatening to the established order. That evening, Marcus discussed the situation with his mother. Elaine Johnson had watched her son denied opportunities for too long to counsel caution now. These university people didn't believe in you for 8 years while you cleaned their floors, she reminded him. Now suddenly they want to celebrate discovering you. You don't owe them anything, Marcus. It's not about owing, he replied, absently rubbing his lower back as he paced their small living room. It's about finally having the chance to do what I was meant to do. Then take it, Elaine said firmly. But on your terms, not theirs. The following day, Marcus requested a meeting with Dean Harrington, Dr. Okafor, and, to their surprise, Professor Collins. I'll accept the university's offer, Marcus announced when they were assembled, with 3 conditions. Elizabeth nodded encouragingly. We're listening. First, the scholarship in my name needs to specifically prioritize students who have faced physical or systemic barriers to education. Absolutely, Elizabeth agreed. Second, I want to develop a program identifying mathematical talent in maintenance staff, service workers, and other non-traditional populations, at Westfield and beyond. Amara smiled broadly. Brilliant idea. Third, Marcus turned directly to Richard Collins. I want Professor Collins to co-teach my first course. Silence fell over the room. Richard's expression registered shock, then suspicion. Why? Because mathematics benefits from different perspectives, Marcus replied simply. Your formal training and my intuitive approach could offer students a more complete understanding than either alone. Richard studied Marcus with new consideration. The janitor was not seeking triumph or revenge, but synthesis, a mathematically elegant solution to their conflict. I'll consider it, Richard finally said, his tone suggesting this was a significant concession. As the meeting concluded, Marcus found himself alone with Richard in the hallway. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Richard spoke. You could have used this situation to push me out, he observed. Many would have. Marcus shook his head. That wouldn't advance mathematics. And ultimately, that's what matters to me. For perhaps the first time, Richard looked at Marcus not as a janitor or an inconvenient anomaly, but as a genuine colleague. Your approach to the quantum algorithm problem last week, I've been reviewing it. There's merit in your methodology. Coming from Richard Collins, this qualified praise represented a monumental shift. As Marcus walked away, he realized that the most significant equation he'd solved wasn't mathematical at all, it was the complex human problem of finding his rightful place in a world that had tried to define his value by his circumstances rather than his capabilities. And that solution, like the best mathematics, was both elegant and transformative. 6 months after Marcus Johnson accepted the position at Westfield University, the mathematics department gathered for an unprecedented ceremony. The Wall of Achievement, previously reserved for traditionally credentialed scholars, received a new addition, Marcus's formal portrait alongside recognition of his contributions to quantum algorithm optimization. Dr. Amara Okafor served as Master of Ceremonies, addressing the assembled faculty, students, and special guests with evident satisfaction. Today marks not just the recognition of exceptional talent, but a transformation in how we identify and nurture mathematical brilliance. Marcus stood at the side of the room, still uncomfortable with public attention but determined to represent the principle his journey embodied. His mother sat in the front row, elegant in a new dress purchased with her son's first research fellowship check. Most surprising to many was Richard Collins' presence on the platform. The professor who had once been Marcus's most vocal opponent now introduced him to the audience. Mathematics teaches us many lessons, Richard began, his voice more reflective than anyone could remember hearing. Perhaps the most important is that our initial approaches to problems are often limited by our assumptions. Challenging those assumptions, recognizing alternate pathways, is essential to discovery. Richard's gaze found Marcus. Mr. Johnson, Professor Johnson, has taught this department a crucial lesson. Brilliance doesn't require our permission or certification to exist. It merely awaits recognition. The professional transformation in Richard Collins had not come easily. The university board's review of his conduct toward Marcus had resulted in a formal reprimand and required participation in diversity and equity training. More significantly, Richard had been passed over for the department chairmanship he had long coveted. Yet these consequences had prompted genuine reflection. Working with Marcus on their co-taught advanced calculus course had forced Richard to reconsider long-held beliefs about academic pathways and intellectual merit. After the ceremony, Marcus gave his first official lecture as research fellow, standing at a specially designed podium that accommodated his back condition. His audience included mathematics faculty from 3 neighboring universities, all curious about the janitor-turned-mathematician who had overturned academic conventions. Mathematics exists independent of our discovery of it, Marcus began, comfortable now in the language of numbers if not yet in public speaking. The patterns we seek to understand were present before any university was built, before any degree was conferred. Our challenge is to recognize these patterns however and wherever they appear. Dean Elizabeth Harrington watched from the back of the room with quiet satisfaction. Beyond the positive publicity Marcus's story had generated for Westfield, his presence had catalyzed important institutional change. The university had established new protocols for identifying talent among non-traditional populations, including service staff. 2 maintenance workers and a cafeteria employee had already enrolled in special education programs based on demonstrated aptitude. Most significantly, the Marcus Johnson Scholarship had been endowed with substantial university funds, dedicated to students from disadvantaged backgrounds with exceptional mathematical ability. The first recipient, a young woman from Marcus's former high school, would begin studies next semester. After the lecture, Ms. Patterson's name was never mentioned within the mathematics department, though her legacy lingered in the persistent pain that occasionally caused Marcus to lean against lecterns during lengthy derivations. The teacher whose cruelty had derailed his education had never faced legal consequences, but her teaching license had been permanently revoked after the incident. As the academic year progressed, Marcus developed a unique teaching style that combined intuitive understanding with rigorous proof, standing rather than sitting, often working through problems alongside students rather than presenting from prepared notes. His approach particularly resonated with students who struggled with traditional instruction. Richard Collins, still adjusting to his new role as Marcus's colleague rather than adversary, found himself increasingly influenced by the former janitor's methodologies. Their co-taught course became unexpectedly popular, with students appreciating the complementary perspectives. One evening as they prepared materials for the following day's lecture, Richard asked the question that had troubled him for months. "Why did you request me as co-instructor? After everything I did to obstruct you, it would have been justifiable to exclude me entirely." Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Mathematics taught me that the most beautiful solutions often come from integrating apparently opposing elements. Your approach and mine, they're different paths to the same destination." Richard nodded slowly. "I've spent 3 decades believing there was only one valid pathway. And I've spent 15 years solving equations in my head while mopping floors," Marcus replied without bitterness. "Neither perspective is complete on its own." As they parted that evening, Marcus walked through the building that had once been merely his workplace and now served as his academic home. He passed a maintenance worker cleaning classrooms and stopped to exchange respectful greetings, conscious of the journey that had brought him from one role to the other. Outside, the campus was quiet under a canopy of stars, the same mathematical universe that had captivated him since childhood now the subject of his professional exploration. Despite everything, despite the obstacles and injustices, numbers had remained his constant companions, waiting patiently for the world to recognize what they had always known. Marcus Johnson, the janitor mathematician, had finally found his equation for justice, complex and hard one, but ultimately, perfectly balanced. Dear friend, this story reminds us that brilliance exists everywhere, in classrooms and maintenance closets, in prestigious universities and underserved communities. Too often, we judge people's abilities by their circumstances rather than their potential. Remember Marcus Johnson the next time you encounter someone whose position might lead you to underestimate their capabilities. True intelligence transcends credentials. True education happens wherever curious minds exist. And true justice comes when we recognize talent regardless of its packaging. If this story touched you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate the extraordinary potential in every human being.